Evening and welcome. I am Renee Battle Brooks, the Executive Director of the Prince George's County Office of Human Rights. We are the county civil and human rights education and enforcement agency. The Office of Human Rights investigates complaints of civil rights discrimination. We aid in combating human trafficking in the county and in the region. We oversee the county's language access program, ensuring that residents can access county government services in the language of their preference. And we operate an outreach program designed to build understanding across diverse peoples. Over the last 2.5 years, much of our outreach work has been in partnership with the Prince George's County Memorial Library System, and it is my pleasure to welcome you tonight for another in our participation or partner series, Women in Faith, Diverse Voices Speak. Tonight, we welcome 3 guest panelists in conversation on how does our faith guide us to deal with intolerance within ourselves. These are, we know, intolerant times, political polarization, frustration at ongoing inequities, fear about our environment, our health, and our future. We see this intolerance in other people, and at times we look closely, or if we look closely, we can see it in ourselves. But there is beauty in that. And I may not always be able to do much, if anything, about other people's anger or intolerance, but I can always do something about mine. And tonight, I look forward to hearing from our guests about how their faiths, their sacred texts, provide guidance and wisdom on just how to do that. We have 3 great panelists that will join us in conversation. And for those watching at home, we're going to ask that if you have any questions, please share them with us, and we will share them with our speakers during our panel discussion time. So we're going to hear from 3 separately, and then we'll all gather to have a discussion. Our first speaker is Rahmah Abdulaleem. She is the Executive Director of the Rahmah Muslim Women Lawyers for Human Rights, where she works to create a global network of advocates knowledgeable about the gender and equity principles of Islam and are able to advance the cause of Muslim women's rights in legal and social environments. She advocates for civil rights, religious freedom, empowerment, and justice for women. She graduated from Duke University with a double major in religion and sociology with a certificate in marketing and management studies. Ms. Abdulaleem obtained her JD from the University of Michigan Law School and worked at a top international corporate law firm for 14 years. We now welcome Rahmah. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you for having me. I always enjoy these conversations. I think they're so important, especially in these trying times, as you mentioned. So I am the executive director of Rahmah. And what I'd like to start off with tonight is kind of the background of Rahmah, why Rahmah started. So we will be celebrating our 30th year next year. And we came about 30 years ago, for the people in the audience who can remember, the first World Trade Center bombing. And the 3 founders were really concerned about really the anti-Muslim rhetoric that they were hearing about their faith. And they were like, that's not the faith I know. That's not the faith that I want to share with the world. And I don't think the world knows, especially here in the West, and especially in the United States, much about my faith. And so Rahmah was established. And Rahmah gets its name from an ayat in the Holy Quran that says, we have given Rahmah to the children of Adam. And Rahmah means dignity. And it says to the children of Adam. It does not say to the Muslim children of Adam. It doesn't say to the straight or gay or black or white. It says to the children of Adam. And it's really important that we stress that, because too often people think that, oh, Muslims are so intolerant and Muslims can't deal with other people. And it's really, that's not our faith tradition. Our faith tradition is about tolerance. Our faith tradition is about loving one another and wanting for your brother and sister what you want for yourself. And I think it's that goal that we have of wanting for your brother and sister what you want for yourself is what we try to build our lives on. And it's really upsetting when you hear people say, oh, you guys are trying to be here and bring Sharia, and Sharia is bad, like Sharia is the boogeyman. And for Muslims, it is very concerning because everything we do is based on Sharia. So, a couple of tips. We hear people say Sharia law. That is an incorrect terminology because Sharia itself means law. So, you're basically saying law. But Sharia governs everything from how we eat. We are supposed to eat halal, which for people who recognize kosher, it's kind of similar to kosher. It's how the animal is slaughtered. It's how we pray. It's how we treat other people. How it's everything that we do in our daily lives. So for people that say, "Oh, you guys are trying to bring Sharia," Sharia people is already here because Muslims are already embodying that all the time as we are here in the United States. And so, really, when we're dealing with intolerance, part of the issue is learning tolerance towards others. So a lot of times people are like, I put up with you. And you don't want people to just put up with you. Tolerance is really respect and compassion. And that's what we think of at Karama as dignity, is treating people with respect and compassion. And the tolerance that you don't want people just to be tolerating you. You want them to be treating you with respect and compassion. And that does not always mean that you have to agree with them on everything. But do you want to be treated negatively by your fellow human beings? And I think for a lot of us, we are so wrapped up in the labels that we give each other. And it's like, oh, I'm from this area. Oh, I am this religious tradition. And even within religious traditions, it's like, oh, I'm from especially for Muslims, I'm from this school of thought. I follow this school of thought. I'm Sunni, I'm Shia, I'm Sufi, my sheikh is this person. I follow this person. Oh, what country are you from? Oh, you guys don't have the true tradition. And all that intolerance kind of builds up so that we really are kind of bringing negativity to ourselves. And so I'd like to stress that it's really important that we have even self tolerance because too often we don't have even enough respect for ourselves because we're letting other people's ideas really overtake us. And so we really need to, in my opinion, focus on that, ayat from the Quran, which is a verse from the Quran that just says we have given dignity to the children of Adam, that all of us were given dignity. And for Muslims, we believe that everyone, regardless of their faith tradition, deserves dignity, deserves karama. And that's why we put it as the name of our organization, because we wanted to make sure that it was in the forefront for us to know that it's important that when you're dealing with everyone, to treat people better than how they're treating you. And that's part of what we feel is our divinely given to us as human beings, that we are here as vicegerents on earth to really protect the earth. That's why for Muslims, environmental causes are important for us. Everything is important for us because we are here to really do our part to be tolerant of others, and not just be tolerant, and to really not say, well, they were intolerant towards me or disrespectful towards me, so I'm going to give it back to them. And I think that all of the traditions that we'll talk tonight will talk about the fact that, that is not in the core of any of our traditions. And I can say that because I was a religion major. So I studied a small, tiny bit compared to, Reverend Johnson and Rabbi Abbi, really tiny compared to them. But I know that the core of our faith traditions is the respect and compassion for our fellow human beings. And I really think that if we start with ourselves and really giving ourselves a break. I think too often, sometimes we are the biggest negativity. Like we don't believe enough in ourselves and have enough respect and compassion for ourselves and for, as humans, making mistakes. And it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to, you made a mistake, you move on from that. And I think too often we get wrapped up in our mistakes and get down on ourselves and become very negative. And that's why, in ways, we're teaching our children a better, I hear all the time, my niece talks about the growth mindset. We are really trying to teach our children a better way of really thinking about, what, things happen, but then we move on. And I think that if we are more tolerant for ourselves and really show people the respect and compassion that we want to be shown ourselves, that we can all be better. And so it's really important, as when you're thinking about your faith does not mean, you know, I have this, religious freedom. I have this religious freedom here in the United States to be respected because of my faith, and that you can't tell me any differently. But it's a shield. It's not supposed to be used as a sword. You shouldn't be using your religious faith to really cut down another religious faith, cut down another person who does not have any faith at all. It should really be something that is personal to you, as a shield to you, and how you get through each day. And so in dealing with intolerance, make sure you're dealing with yourself with respect and compassion, so you can show respect and compassion for others. Thank you.
I have to find the unmute button. Thank you so much. That was really well put. I can't wait for our discussion. So thank you. Next, we have Reverend Janelle Johnson. She attended the University of Illinois with a full track and field scholarship, and later transferred to George Mason University, earning a bachelor's degree in broadcast journalism. Her local appointment to a cabinet-level agency for the federal government allows Reverend Johnson to exercise due diligence, leading the agency's workforce and organizational effectiveness strategies. In 2014, she was appointed to the Prince George's County Human Rights Commission, now the Human Rights Commission, where she was elected as vice chair in 2017 and served as vice chair until October of 2019. Reverend Johnson was ordained in 2012. She is a servant leader on the ministerial staff at Reed Temple AME Church and the director of their domestic violence ministry. As an author, she released her book, Is He Spiritual? Do You Deserve Only God's Best? In 2017, detailing her encounter with domestic violence. In 2019, she moderated a discussion at the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation annual legislative conference entitled You Matter to Me, Domestic Violence and Strategic Community Alliances. Reverend Johnson earned a master's degree in business from Johns Hopkins University, a certificate in theology and ministry from Princeton Theological Seminary, and a graduate degree in law from the George Washington University School of Law. So thank you, and welcome.
Thank you so much, Renee. It's so good to be with you this evening. And just a few updates. I've been a sort of a family member, if you will, to the Office of Human Rights, having served and no longer being a commissioner. I still feel part of the family, and sometimes family members move away and they do other exciting things. So I'm happy to say at this time I'm still working at a different cabinet level agency, but I'm leading diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, leading President Biden's executive order that he has sent out to all federal agencies. And so I'm extraordinarily excited to be leading. And I think that dovetails quite well with our discussion tonight as we talk about tolerance versus intolerance. And so I'm excited to be with you tonight, but I think it's really prudent that we take a step back and really understand, what does tolerance mean? What does intolerance mean, rather, so that we have a baseline? And as I was listening to Rahmah speak, I was really touched by a lot of things that she said, that it really begins inside and how we see ourselves. And really, intolerance is, if we just look at the textbook definition, it's about, refusing to accept ideas and beliefs or behaviors that are different from your own, whether they be racial or religious intolerance. But I think sometimes if we take a step back, we can really understand, sort of in a self-reflective way, what intolerance really means when we really start examining ourselves. And so we are often intolerant of ourselves, and it's manifested through a term that a lot of people are talking about these days as we read a lot of different books, this thing called imposter syndrome. And sometimes because of the bigotry or the racial inequity that we experience, it can exacerbate those feelings of inadequacy. And we don't really see ourselves in the divine way that we were created. We are created with purpose. We are created with gifts and talents. And in my faith tradition, we often use the word anointings. We're all gifted and created to do something unique. And it's just up to us to find out what that thing is. But we are often intolerant of ourselves because of socialization and the messages that come to us. And so often when we are intolerant of ourselves, when we receive praise or achieve greatness, we experience often this overwhelming feeling of self-doubt, and we begin to question our own value and question our own merits. And so I want to really encourage everyone who's joining us tonight. If you're having those feelings of intolerance, we've all felt them at one time or another. I think even Michelle Obama, former First Lady Michelle Obama, talked about having the feeling of imposter syndrome. We've all felt it at any point in our lives. And if you haven't felt that, just keep living. But I want to encourage us tonight as we have this discussion, and for those who are joining us, to aim for progress, not perfection. And forgive yourself for not being perfect. In my faith tradition, our faith is really rooted in forgiveness. It's rooted in love. And if you look at all of the major religions of the world, they're rooted in love. They're rooted in this notion, this feeling, this action called love. And really, love begins within. If you cannot love yourself, then you cannot love others the way that you were created to love them. I also want to suggest and recommend those who may be feeling some feelings of intolerance. Reward yourself for success. It's okay. It's okay to tell yourself, I am enough. I did my best, and here are the results to prove, how hard I've worked. Here's the fruit of my hard work. And also, I want to encourage people tonight to lead with bravery and vulnerability. It's okay to say, I'm a little uncomfortable here. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be intolerant of yourself. And be intentional. The based upon your actions. There's in my faith tradition, we talk about out of out of your actions, your intention speaks, if you will. So I think it's really important tonight that as we move forward, that we have this understanding of what is intolerance, how do we become intolerant of ourselves, and then what are those recommendations to turn it around. And so as we move forward tonight, and for those who are watching, I want you to know that you are enough. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. And if we can all begin to see ourselves in that space of belonging, that space of we're all good enough, I think that's how we bring communities together, and that's how we lead forward with inclusion. So I'm going to stop talking because I can wax on poetically about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I can also wax on poetically about why you are enough, but there are some other great folks that have things to share on their heart as well. So thank you so much for allowing me to share.
Thank you so much, Janelle. I love that. You are enough. That's great. Again, I can't wait to talk when we get everybody together. I have questions as always. So thank you. We next welcome Rabbi Abbi Sharofsky. She is the Jewish Community Relations Council's Director of Intergroup Relations and Rabbi in Residence. She studied at the Jewish Theological Seminary and was ordained in 2012. Abbi also holds a master's degree from the Davidson School of Jewish Education, specializing in experiential education. Abbi was the deputy director of the Jewish Welfare Board Jewish Chaplains Council, where she worked with Jewish military personnel and veterans. Rabbi Sharofsky is the recipient of the 2016 J-Pro Young Professional Award for her dedication to the Jewish community through her work in the not-for-profit field. She is a 2018 Fellow of Rabbis Without Borders Fellow. We welcome you. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here with such amazing women. And one of the things that I'm particularly valuing about this time together is that I think, unfortunately, too often as women, we devalue ourselves, and we find more intolerance in ourselves than we should. And I am truly loving being in this holy space tonight with all of you and sharing these words and hearing our truths, and hopefully raising us out of some of that, raising us out of some of those difficult places. When I thought about this this program, intolerance of others, intolerance of ourselves. What does this mean to what does this mean in the realm of intergroup work, work where I am where I try to bridge aspects of what's going on in the Jewish community with other faith communities? How can other faith communities understand what's happening in the Jewish community, and then how can the Jewish community understand what other faith communities are experiencing, as well as other ethnic, cultural, socio everything. So it's an awesome job. It's great work, and the struggle at this time is that too often I found myself in spaces where I'm trying to explain who I am as a Jew and who Jews are, as a reaction to anti-Semitism. And anti-Semitism is the numbers are dramatically high. And they're only increasing. And it's scary to know that this one of the world's oldest hatreds is constantly renewing itself. And here in the DMV, we're not exempt from that. There are issues that came up just as recent as this past weekend at synagogues throughout at a synagogue throughout this area. So when I think about what does tolerance mean, I think about I go to two texts, and the first text is this: how are we thinking about tolerance and intolerance in an outward way, so of others, and thinking about the work in Pirkei Avot. It's a Mishnah, comes from the rabbinic era, rabbinic writings from around the 2nd and 3rd century CE. And Pirkei Avot is this collection of sort of maxims and sayings and just wisdom bits that are that the rabbis compiled together. And it's one of my favorite texts. It's very accessible and very full of useful little short messages that have a big impact. And I'm going to share two of them with you tonight. So one of them, Pirkei Avot, chapter 4, verse 3. Ben Azai, one of the rabbis, used to say, do not despise any man and do not discriminate against anything, for there is no man that has not his hour, and there is no thing that has not his place. So as my colleagues have said, we are created in this divine image. We are, as we go through this world, we are individuals, but we are individuals who are connected to each other. And this idea of there is no person that is not going to go through something, and that you see someone and you don't know what's happening for them. You don't know what these, what are the challenges that they're facing at this time. It's this, how do we give this sense of as I learned from my Christian colleagues over the years, how do we extend grace? And what does that mean? But I also think about that as, what does this mean for faith equity? And what does this mean for how we are seeing religion in the equity space? And this is something that I end up working with a lot, my colleagues and I, examining, well, what does it mean when you're talking about Judaism in DEI spaces and talking about Jewish peoplehood and the Jewish people as part of an ethno-religion? What is all of that? And how are we inserting that narrative into the larger DEI narrative? And it's a really tricky one. There's so much there. And I'm finding that these pieces of tolerance and intolerance, and so much of it comes from simply I just didn't know. And so often my encounters with people are, I just didn't know that was an issue. I just didn't know that that's what Jews believed, or that was a practice. Teach me, learn with me, help me to understand better. And I love those moments. Those are some of my favorite. But when I thought about this, I also really wanted to get into some of the intolerance of ourselves. And I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the Jewish holidays that just passed this past month. many of you know it as September, October. In the Jewish world, it was Tishrei. And this was the biggie. This had Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, Sukkot, Shmini Atzeret, Simchat Torah. We had all of these holidays, but those biggies, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, those were our high holy days. So what do we do during that time? In the month leading up to Rosh Hashanah, we engage in what's called Cheshbon HaNefesh, literally an inventory of our souls. And what does that really mean, to like get into your soul and sit there and take that inventory and check out and say, where am I with people? What's going on? Who do I need to, work my stuff out? And who do I need to talk to before I get to Yom Kippur, to that Day of Atonement and to that time of year? And we spend that month leading up working with our fellow human beings, with the people in our lives, with sort of the outside world. But then that month of Tishrei, that holy month with all those holidays, we are working, it's between us and God. So we have to go internal. And that intolerance, that's that intolerance of ourselves. What's going on? And how do we take an inventory of what is happening in our internal struggle? How do we understand that? And how do we get right with God? And that's so hard. I mean, that's this really hard stuff that, as Reverend Janelle said, what happens when that imposter syndrome, I mean, it hits hard in that space, but also in knowing that we don't know what that answer is going to be. Which leads me to the second Pirkei Avot that I wanted to share, the second Mishnah. Rabbi Eliezer said, "Let the honor of your friend be as dear to you as your own, and be not easily provoked to anger, and repent one day before your death." And I think about that last line, repent. It was Pirkei Avot, chapter 2, verse 10. And I think about that last segment, repent one day before your death. Unfortunately, my family suffered a loss in the month leading up to Rosh Hashanah. And we had a lot of the question of what does it mean to understand ourselves and where we stand in this time was a really hard one for us. It was a hard one for myself, for my spouse. And he and I discussed what does that mean to repent one day before your death? Because we don't know when that day is. And that means that we're constantly living in this state of how are we keeping ourselves right? How are we doing this internal cheshbon hanefesh, this checking of our souls? And how are we thinking about our internal and our external at all times? So it's an ongoing thing. We can't fix this in one day. And the thing that I really love about the Jewish holidays in this time of year is that we're not expected to fix it all in one day. There's a certain amount of space that's given to continually work on this process of ourselves and then how we bring that outward. And I'm grateful for that. And I do take the time to think, what do I need to do to get myself right so that I can go out and do better in the world? Thanks.
Thank you so much. That was great, Abby. I love I just didn't know. And also I love in your faith tradition, the checking in with your soul, sort of that yearly inventory. So that's wonderful. I've got a lot of questions. So Kyla and Fatima, if you want to bring everyone back. Yeah, awesome. And I agree with what you said, Abby. It's wonderful to have all of us here together from different perspectives, really holding each other up and supporting each other. And it doesn't happen nearly enough as women, just really banding together in our we have lots of common threads. As each of you were speaking, I was really thinking about doing reflection. And I wonder, how do we differentiate between intolerance and and whether we are hiding behind perhaps a particular dogma of our faith or a perception of what we think our faith says, right? And I'm not trying to be intolerant of others, but I wonder, right? You know, from my particular faith perspective, it's easy for me to be hypercritical of people from my faith perspective, but I think sometimes, you know, we hide behind things that are, and Rahmah, you touched a little bit on it. So how do we, if this journey of finding our own intolerance begins internally with us, how do we not hide behind sort of a false flag or something, right?
Well, I think that that's a great point. And what I will say is that I'm always shocked about how little people know about their own faith. They are not standing so much behind the rich tradition of their faith or know any details of their faith. They know some, you know, like headlines. Like we're all kind of like in this Twitter age. They know just enough to be dangerous. And they'll say something and then you're like, where's that? Where'd you get that from? Mm-hmm. Oh, it's in the Holy Book. Where? Show it to me. One of the founders, is really passionate about our Holy Book. And she constantly says to Muslims, because we're constantly, you know, fighting amongst ourselves like every faith tradition has. You know, culture divides us, but the Quran unites us. And she's always talking about go back to the Holy Book and show me where it is. Don't tell me about, well, from my country, this is how we pray, or this is how we eat, or this is how we do this, or women are supposed to do this, this, and this because this is how it's done in my country. It's amazing how little we know about our own faith. And so I always stress to people that I want you to know about your faith yourself. I want you to study. I don't want you to tell me what your parents tell you, you know, what you've heard that you've memorized. I still remember being in my New Testament class and being so mad that there were some people who could just like recite off stuff. And I'm just like, how do they know that? They have been memorizing since they were little. And this was my first time really getting into the New Testament when I was a student in college. But when the teacher said, oh, I'm glad you could memorize that. Tell me what that means. They couldn't tell what that meant. So, and I say that happens in all faith traditions. People know the headlines. They know some key terminology, but they don't really know their religion. And I feel that we could move away from the dogma of not really knowing our religion. I mean, classic example, what's really happening right now. I have so many Muslims who come up to me and say, I'm pro-life. I'm like, so you don't know your jurisprudence on abortion in Islam? And they're like, oh, yes, I'm pro-life. I'm like, no, go back and study and come back to me with that. And so really just telling people to learn their own faith. Stop worrying about what other people's faiths are because you're always willing to tell somebody you're not being a good this and you're not being. Be a good person in your own faith. And I tell Muslims, be a good Muslim. Learn about what it means to be a Muslim and then go from there.
So I'll summarize and then we'll have Janelle and Abbi. So what you're saying is how a good way to start learning how to differentiate between intolerance, or sometimes we hide behind the dogma saying, oh no, but you know, my religion says, right, is learn truly. So if you say you are, know what you are, right?
Yes.
Okay, outstanding. Thank you. Who else? Abbi, Janelle, who wants to go next?
I'll go. Oh, I don't know. You're taking a breath, Abbi. I didn't know if you were kind of like in the moment.
So one of the things that you said, Rahmah, about that really hit me in saying the you know how to quote it, but you don't know what it means. There's so much. There's like this fear and vulnerability, and what happens when you have to move beyond quoting and then allow yourself to really get into the text and get into what's going on for, you know, how does that actually impact your faith? And people don't want to do that because then there's questions and then what happens? And it's, you know, where do we go from there? And I feel like there's so much risk associated with moving beyond the memorization. And I always push people. Clearly, I push people to move beyond it. But that was coming up for me as you were speaking of what would it look like if we were willing to take more risk and to have more vulnerability in how we understand our faiths.
I love that. I love that. Janelle.
I think as we're talking, what really comes to mind for me is humility. Operating from a place of humility that we don't one person have all of the answers. And so when we operate from that place of humility and saying, I don't have all the answers. Why don't you share with me what you know? And then move from that place, we can create those brave spaces. A lot of people use the term safe spaces. I've kind of moved from that. And now I'm using the phrase safe spaces where we can engage in dialogue and have those thoughtful, insightful conversations. And it's okay. And it's okay to disagree. I think we have, and I'm really thinking about Renee's question about, hiding behind the dogma and not engaging with others who may believe differently or have a different lived experience. When you operate from a place of humility, then that kind of puts you in a vulnerable space, right? And you have to move from that brave space to be able to have that conversation. And as I think about having those brave spaces, it also requires us to think critically. And I think one of the things in our culture today is we don't really think critically about what we're saying, why we're saying it. We just kind of repeat what we've been told. And we don't operate from that space of analytical thinking to say, okay, well, why do I believe what I believe, right? Why do I believe that? Is it because somebody told me that? Or have I had this lived experience where I've been able to walk out and prove what I believe, right? And I think the real test of how committed we are to our faith, I think Rahmah is so on point with this about studying what we believe and then living it out so that it's real, right? And that it's not phony. And to your point, you're not just quoting what someone heard or someone told you and you basically heard it. So now you're parroting what you've heard. Another thing that comes to mind is this notion of redemption, right? This note of if someone doesn't get it right and someone says something that's off, do we have enough grace within us to be able to say, you know what, that's not right, or that's not very inclusive. Let me show you a better way. And I think people, particularly in different spheres, I don't want to get into politics, whatever, but I've never seen a culture so divided right now. You're either on this side or you're on that side, and there's no in between. And so people are not having thoughtful conversations because we've lost the grace for humanity, I think. And I think the way that we get it back is by infusing our conversations with critical thinking, but it begins from operating from a place of humility.
I love that. Can you, I guess as a baseline, each maybe define what tolerance is in your faith and what your faith says about intolerance?
Ooh, that's a good one. You're getting deep tonight, Renee.
Well, I have to say that question came from Fatima.
Thank you, Fatima, for that question. I'll be quiet. I didn't know if any of my colleagues wanted to speak to that first, since I just spoke. But that's a really great question.
So from the very beginning, for Muslims, going back to, Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, we were really taught tolerance from the very beginning because, when our religion was coming about, we were in a very hostile territory. And so we were really welcomed by the Jewish community members in Medina who welcomed us to Medina and really helped us build the Muslim faith there. And so for us, it was always important from the very beginning to have tolerance and respect for other faiths, because we always knew what it was like to be on the outside, to be an outsider. And that is something that has continued to this day. I tell people, when you really see a Muslim country acting out the ideals of Islam, you see a welcoming people. When they are not living it out, they have really gone back to the dogma, to infusing culture into it, because we were a welcoming people. and we are a welcoming community. We talk about ourselves as an ummah, and ummah means community, but we also call our mothers ummi, like my mother. So it comes from the same root of this love and concern for other people. And so in my faith tradition, it's all about, from the very beginning, we are all human beings. And we are all human beings that need respect and compassion for other people, dignity for everyone, karama for everyone. And so that it's not okay to be like, oh, you're not a Muslim, it's okay, I kill you. That is not the core of our religion. And that drives me crazy when people are like, that's what your book says. I'm like, first of all, go find that in my holy book, because that's not what my holy book says. And really talk about, we believe in the dignity of all human beings. It is never okay for anyone to die in the name of Islam saying, oh, that's what you guys are taught. And so really learning what Islam is all about, and really the core of Islam is so important, is that the core is this love and respect and compassion for our fellow human beings. And so that's what, I'm sure there's, special definitions, but when I think of the definitions of intolerance and tolerance for my faith, that's what I think of.
Excellent. Thank you. Who else wants to tackle that question?
So I go back to the, a core text from the Torah, from the 5 books of Moses, which then gets, used again in the Christian Bible, this idea of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. And I think that it gets the fundamental of it, like the very basics, translates well in Judaism and Christianity. I think the perversion of it is when it gets problematic. The same, Rahmah, like you're saying about the, oh, this is what must, right. No, I think when, and I don't want to speak for Christians or speak badly about, but I think that there is this thing that happens when our texts get sort of twisted and misunderstood, and a text that is so deeply about tolerance and living in a shared society, just gets lost. And I think the other pieces that I really pull up about tolerance and intolerance from my tradition is also this idea of, you were once a stranger in the strange land. Like, what is like to be the stranger. Similar to the Muslim community, Jewish community knows what it means to be in exile and to have to develop as a diaspora religion. So it's ingrained, and it's ingrained in a way that's also years and years, not even years, generations upon generations upon generations of trauma. And how do we understand that we're all going through this as people carrying a deep-seated intergenerational trauma? And it's in our DNA. It's in the DNA of so many of us, for so many different reasons. And what happens when my trauma hits up against your trauma? And then we all start to, we do that thing. We play the trauma Olympics, and it never works out well. And because there's plenty to go around. And if we just took a minute to realize that if I humanize you, I'm not taking anything else away from me. So that's what I'm sitting with. I also deeply struggle with how, especially when I'm navigating between Jewish and Christian spaces and with my Christian colleagues, on understanding some of the hegemony that comes out in our world, that and I give the perfect example of, December's coming. When's the last time you heard a Hanukkah song played in the supermarket? When was the last time that you had to miss, or that your children had to miss school because of a major religious holiday? that was one of the holiest days of the year, or was expected to, take a test or turn in a project the next day. So there's like big picture tolerance, and then there's sort of of course we tolerate you on our terms, which it's hard. It's really hard right now.
That's such a good point. Of course, we tolerate you on our terms. Wow. Yeah, that's deep. That is deep.
As you were sharing, Rabbi, I was thinking about there's a scripture in my faith tradition that says, finally, all of you be like-minded, be sympathetic, love one another, be compassionate and humble. And as we were talking, and I'm struggling with the word tolerant, because tolerant to me really means accepting ideas or beliefs that are not your own. But I don't want to stop at tolerance. I want to move to inclusion, right? Because there's one thing to be tolerated. There's another thing to be included. And as you were talking about, holidays, and I have had in my professional spaces, colleagues that are Jewish, and that feeling that they have with their children, and when the holiday season comes around, and navigating that and making sure their children feel included. It's a really interesting notion of tolerance. And as I sit here with you in this space, in this beautiful space, I'm struggling with that word, because I don't want to stay there. I want to move to that space of inclusion. And of course, I can't usurp the theme, but tonight. But as we move in this particular space, there's another thought, another scripture that comes to mind too. And I think it goes back to the notion of humility. I don't know why that's in my heart tonight. I don't know why I'm kind of carrying that in my heart and my spirit tonight, but I'm really carrying that as I think about humility. And in my own faith tradition, it's really rooted in inclusion. As I think about the scriptures and in my faith tradition, it's really about bringing people who come from different spaces and places into this space. And you think about, I'm a follower of Jesus. That's my faith. He went among people who were not like him. And so people would often say, you're not really the real deal, because you're going among people who have battered and bruised pasts and backgrounds, and people who don't look like us and dress like us. I'm kind of, modernizing the scriptures, but you get my point and what I'm trying to get at. And I think people who really embrace Christianity and really live it are people who can do that. Embrace people who believe differently, look differently, have a different lived experience, and still make them feel included and not just tolerated. And so as we move through this discussion tonight, I'm going to do my best to stay in that place of tolerance, but there's this natural gravitation and pull to inclusion. And so I'll leave with this. One of the scriptures in my faith tradition says, as I have loved you, so you must love one another. And so for people who love it, I keep saying that, really love it, because we do have people in our faith tradition, as you were speaking, Rahmah, who argue back and forth over things that are not important. I think last time I was with you back last spring, I talked about how someone walked up to me and said, "Oh, Reverend Janelle had on skinny jeans," because you're not supposed to wear skinny jeans, if you're a reverend, and things like that really divide us. Women can't wear pants, or women can't wear makeup, things that aren't just important, right? And so that is intolerant, right? Because it's not allowing people to be their true, authentic selves. So as we move in the conversation tonight, I think I'm probably going to keep gravitating back to that place of humility. That's how we move beyond tolerance, right? Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing there.
No, I love that. Because when I think about it, the word tolerance, it's kind of like what Rabbi Abbi was saying, kind of like, I'm going to tolerate you, right? And really, from each of our faith, it should be, if we believe what our faith, each of our individual faith says, it is not just tolerating, it's embracing, it's right, loving, it's, all of those things. So very, very interesting. Another question. How should we, and this is all through each of your particular faith lens, how should we react then when our faith is challenged? And that's wide open, because that could be anything.
As someone whose faith is challenged all the time, I'm quite used to it. And once again, it's usually challenged on headlines, not really knowing what my faith's about. Picking up on something that Reverend Johnson just said, the number of times people are like, is some man, your husband, your father, your brother making you cover your hair? And I'm like, why are you so concerned about what I have on my head? Why are you so concerned about how I'm dressing? Like, that is not the biggest issue that Muslims around the world are dealing with. And if that's your concern, you know what? Let it go. Let it go. And so I think that oftentimes when I'm challenged, I usually am smiling saying, okay, so where'd you get that from? Because I get the, if I see your hair, do I have to marry you? Will I be struck by lightning? Some ridiculousness. And this is not just from children. This is from adults educated adults who will say stuff. And I'm like, really? Where are you from? Like, where did you get this idea from? And so constantly it's realizing that sometimes, and I usually take it as it's from a place of wanting to know knowledge. I think it's because both my parents are teachers. I feel this natural need to educate people about my faith because people don't know. So I take it as if you actually want to know. And when you're challenging me, I'm giving you information. I don't go into it thinking you are trying to tear me down, because what my parents really drove hard with me from a young age is that no one else can tear you down. You have to build yourself up and be enough self-respect about who you are as an individual that people will attack you on multiple avenues. I am an African-American Muslim woman living in the United States. It's like there's going to be so many ways that people can come at me. And if I just let everything other people say really affect me, I would have a hard time getting out of bed in the morning. So I really feel that when people ask me questions, I'm like, there's no dumb questions. I'd rather you ask me than to just assume that you know. And so I always come from a place of education that I'm happy to be challenged, because I'm happy to be like, let's talk about it. Where are you coming from? Let's compare. What do you know about your own religious traditions? Because usually the people who are challenging don't know even their own religious tradition to challenge me with. So that's where I come from.
Excellent. Thank you. Rabbi Abbi, Reverend Janelle.
When I think about the times that I've been challenged, and I embrace it, because whenever I'm challenged about my faith, why I believe what I believe, it's always I kind of welcome it a little bit, because it kind of gives me that opportunity to kind of level set and check myself. But I always go back to the relationship. And I just go back to, in my faith tradition, it's really about relationship. It's not about the rules and the regs of what I can do and what I can't do. No skinny jeans over here. I guess the word for tonight is skinny jeans. But I go back to
humility.
And humility. I go back to relationship. And so I don't get into, I never engage into debates of, get into debates of what's right and what's wrong. I just go back to love, which is what it's rooted in. My faith tradition is rooted in love, and it's rooted in relationship with God and relationship with man. And if we can keep that the central focus, usually the challenge turns into a really thoughtful exchange, and I usually have won a new friend. So
excellent. Thank you.
I feel like I don't know. Sometimes it takes a lot to have that much grace. Let's be honest, people. It's hard. And it is hard to go through the world and constantly have some, to be picked at. For your faith, for your gender, for your color, for your ethnicity, and pick a thing, and they're all picking at it. And sometimes I think there's only so much tolerance we can have. And while yes, I love teachable moments, I do. I also sometimes think about, how am I protecting myself? How am I, what's wearing down on me? And I remember this one time I was back when I was living in New York, and I was walking down the street with my daughter, who's in she's a baby at the time, and with one of one of my children is in the stroller, and the someone approached us and was just heckling at us a little bit, and wasn't, just relatively harmless. But at the time I was working as a chaplain, and I had this feeling of, should I be helping? Should I do something? Should I pull one of my, like, chaplain skills out of my pocket? And but I was also in a very mama bear place, because I was with my baby. And I checked it out with my supervisor the next day. And she said, you don't always have to be on. You don't always have to rabbi. You don't always have to chaplain. Sometimes you need to know when to protect yourself and when to protect your family. And it's okay to keep walking. And I take that with me, that there are definitely times, and I mean, and Reverend Janelle, this may happen for you too, where, people have this sort of sense when you're a pastoral caregiver, when you're clergy, even if you give off a vibe. So people will just start talking to me about stuff in like Starbucks. And sometimes, yes, let's talk a little bit, but also sometimes I can't be in that space with you. And I think that's sometimes I can educate, and sometimes I need to know when it's not going to be okay for me. And I think that's an important piece of tolerance we can give ourselves, and not blame ourselves for not always being the teacher.
And it's okay. I just want to piggyback on that. It's okay. It's okay to not engage. I've had those moments before where I could feel the person's energy was just not in a good space, in a good place. So I don't engage. And it's okay. It's okay to protect your peace. It's okay to protect your peace. And it's okay. And it requires, to your point, Rabbi, it requires a level of self-awareness to know what you can handle in that moment. And if that energy is not in a place of goodness, and I don't feel that I'm going to be able to provide value add, I don't engage, and I don't feel bad about it.
Yeah, I think we've learned some really important skills tonight, honestly, right? We've learned that if we're doing our internal check, our self-analysis, that we first need to understand what we believe and why. Right. And to Rabbi Abbi's point, so that came from Rahmah. To Rabbi Abbi's point is like not being afraid to explore that. Right. And back to what Rahmah was saying about, like, right, you can memorize these texts, but what does it mean? So that, those two dovetail. I think we've also learned that self-care that we just talked about, self-care is important, and that you're not always on, and that it's okay. It's okay. And that we should, tolerance is good, but we should probably strive beyond tolerance, because tolerance is kind of, depending on how it's used, can be kind of like milk toast or mealy mouth, like, yeah, I tolerate you, right? But from our own faith perspectives, as I think Reverend Janelle said, like most of the faith perspectives that we know of have this inclusion of love, or this taking care of one another, right? So I think those are all valuable. Boy, English is not my language tonight. Not that anything else is. It's been a long day. But some things when we're each on our journey now about this, we are in turbulent times. We are in turbulent times in this country, and so looking through each of our faith perspectives, looking through that lens, how can we start this journey to maybe help others? But it has to start first with us. How do we check ourselves with our intolerance? How do we learn to be more open? How do we learn to be more accepting? Because if we each do that, that's how we make change. Honestly, it's not some big magical thing. It's relationships, like Reverend Janelle said. So there's so much here. Sadly, we're out of time. We have some questions that came in, but I guess we're just going to have you back. There's so much. I think there's so many things that we can talk about, things that are happening that are relevant in each of our lives and in the lives of our country, and as relates to social, human rights, civil justice, all of these things that we have important things that each of you can share and teach us. As we're all on this journey together, we are all together. So thank you, each and every one of you. It's been a pleasure. The hour went by really fast. And we want to thank everybody that joined in listening to this really good conversation tonight. For further programming, please either Google the Office of Human Rights and you can find out programming. We thank, of course, and always our library partner for assisting in this series. Even though we're out of time, I'm going to go around closing. One thing that each of you want to say. So we'll start. Rabbi Abbi. Okay, I'm just going to go.
I think it's a blessing to be able to be in conversation like this in a world where these conversations are not happening so easily. And I am grateful for that tonight. So thank you all.
Wonderful. Thank you. Reverend Janelle.
Out of the abundance of your actions, your intention speaks. And we have to be intentional. And I'm just so thankful for this space tonight. I had a very long day today, and this conversation has really sort of just kind of poured some really just warm massaging oil on my heart, if you will. And I've really enjoyed being in this sacred and this beautiful space with you. So thank you for sharing your heart and your time with me.
Thank you. And counselor.
Well, I just think that if we all just treated our fellow human beings with respect and compassion, we would all be better off. Just treating each other with respect and compassion.
Thank you. That's it. That is it. Thank you, ladies. Everyone, please stay safe. Have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.
Virtual hugs to everyone.